Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, February 5th, 2021. Want to know what's the best way to increase the minimum wage? Enact the FAIRtax. The national minimum wage was first mandated by the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. This federal law provided for not only the minimum wage, but also overtime pay. Now, one of the stated reasons for the legislation was that jobs that didn't require specialized skills could be filled by just about anybody. And with the number of workers exceeding the number of available jobs, wages for these low-skill jobs were quite low, and the workers who held them had very little leverage to negotiate for better pay. Now, just about every American worker started their working career in one of these low-skill, entry-level jobs, and almost all of them wished they could earn more money. In fact, just about all of us at some time in our working lives have wished we could earn more money so we could provide a better life for ourselves and our families. A March 2018 report by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics shed some light on the people aged 16 and over who were receiving an hourly wage in 2017. 80.4 million workers were paid at hourly rates. That represents 58.3% of all workers. 542,000 workers earned exactly the prevailing federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. About 1.3 million workers were actually paid less than the federal minimum, tipped employees, for example. 1.8 million workers with wages at or below the federal minimum made up 2.3% of all hourly paid workers. The percentage of hourly paid workers earning the prevailing federal minimum wage or less declined from 2.7% in 2016 to 2.3% in 2017. Workers under the age of 25 represented only about 1/5 of hourly paid workers, but they made up about half of those that are paid the federal minimum wage or less. Among employed teenagers ages 16 to 19 paid by the hour, about 8% earned the minimum wage or less, compared with about 1% of workers aged 25 and older. And among workers who were paid an hourly wage in 2017, about 3% of women and about 2% of men had wages at or below the prevailing federal minimum. A July 2019 report from the Congressional Budget Office looked at what would happen if the minimum wage were increased to $15 an hour. That study found that in an average week in 2025, the $15 option would boost wages of about 17 million workers who would otherwise earn less than $15 an hour. Another 10 million workers earning slightly more than $15 an hour might see their wages rise as well. However, another 1.3 million workers would lose their jobs. That's according to the CBO median estimate. The number of people with an annual income below the poverty level threshold in 2025 would fall by 1.3 million. Now let's look at the FAIRtax solution. The information above shows that not only would 1.8 million workers see their pay increased, but 15.2 million more workers who are now making more than the minimum wage but less than $15 an hour would see their wages increased as well. The additional 10 million workers earning slightly more than $15 an hour would likely demand higher wages too. So, a $15 per hour minimum wage would create higher wages for 27 million workers. Now, when a business boosts its employees' wages as a reward for increased productivity, that business is making more money and everyone profits. But when higher wages are just mandated by the government and not brought about as a result of positive business reality, all that does is result in higher expenses with no corresponding increase in income. In that case, businesses are forced to raise prices to the degree that the market will allow, and in many cases that's not enough to make up the difference. So they're forced to cut benefits, reduce the number of workers on their payroll, or reduce the amount of money paid to owners and shareholders. Unlike the federal government, these businesses can't just print more money. Now, bureaucrats and members of Congress, many of whom have never worked a day in the private sector, are appalled that business owners don't just reduce their own income by enough to pay for the government-mandated wage increases and not resort to laying off employees or increasing prices. When these business owners try to deal with their higher expenses in these other ways, they're often labeled selfish and greedy. It's time for a more sensible solution. There has to be a system that will help wage earners without making it more expensive for their employers to do business. Fortunately, there is such a system, the FAIRtax. Now, once the FAIRtax is enacted, workers at all wage levels will see more money in their pockets as the FAIRtax eliminates federal withholding and payroll taxes, allowing all workers to bring home their entire paychecks. Even low-wage workers who don't pay any income tax would see an immediate 7.65% pay increase. That's how much the federal payroll taxes for Social Security and Medicare take from every worker's paycheck. The FAIRtax also eliminates the employer's share of these Social Security and Medicare taxes, and many economists believe that most employers will likely increase employee wages by some of that 7.65% that they no longer have to pay. They'll need to do that in order to keep their good employees from being hired away by other companies that can suddenly afford to offer 7.65% more in wages. In addition to all these benefits flowing directly to wage earners, economists agree that the economy will grow much faster under the FAIRtax than under the income tax. As the economy grows, the demand for workers of all skill levels will increase, putting upward pressure on wages across the board. With the FAIRtax, everybody wins. In conclusion, increasing the minimum wage through government edict might sound good to some, but why help just some people when the FAIRtax helps everybody? Now, unfortunately, many politicians in both parties believe that the only way they can maintain their power is to make people believe that they can't survive without the government's help. And the income tax is a perfect vehicle for making people believe that the government is helping them by giving them tax breaks. Pope Francis has often been criticized by some as being too radical, but his statement about why people seek to make others dependent seems quite true. The Pope said, quoting, "In Europe first, and now in America, elected men have taken it upon themselves to indebt their people to increase an atmosphere of dependency. And why? For their own selfish need to increase their own personal power." End of quote. Now, few will argue that people who can support themselves and their families feel a certain amount of self-respect. And most of us have had to deal with difficult financial times at some point in our lives. Many have had to reach out for help. And when that help came, be it from family, friends, or the government, we were grateful in the moment, but for many, having to ask for financial help is a profoundly humbling experience that can bring with it a sense of failure and loss of self-respect. Recovering from a financial crisis and regaining one's self-respect is always an immensely satisfying experience. Now, we are in control of our own self-respect, not the government. As Mahatma Gandhi said, they cannot take away our self-respect if we don't give it to them. Now, if you have friends who don't know about the FAIRtax, send them to FAIRtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the FAIRtax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the FAIRtax, and learn why the FAIRtax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.